So the examination content outline is just divided into 3 domains. Domain 1, people. Domain 2 are the processes. And domain 3, the business environment. So under each domain are what we call tasks. All right. And the tasks, these are the things that you as a project manager, you are expected to complete within your project. You're going to be managing conflicts. You're going to be leading a team. You're going to be supporting team performance. You're going to be empowering team members and stakeholders. So in empowering team members and stakeholders, what are the enablers? Now, these things that are listed here are what we call enablers. If you read the PMP examination content outline, you would be able to know what these enablers are. Now, it is not exhaustive. There are very many things that you can do as far as empowering team members and stakeholders are concerned. They will not list all of that under your examination content outline, but they will just give you quick examples. For example, organizing the team around their strengths, supporting team task accountability, evaluating demonstration of task accountability, determine and bestow levels of decision-making authority. So these are the things that you're going to be doing while you're performing the task of empowering team. So it will go on under the people domain. It will have tasks to do with how you deal with people. So you just have to go and review these things like negotiating project agreements, addressing and removing obstacles, which is very important in agile projects. Task 9, collaborating with stakeholders. So altogether, we have about 35 tasks that are spread across the 3 domains. The domain being people domain, that has to do with dealing with people, dealing with stakeholders. Process domain, that has to do with the ways of working. We've talked about the different ways of working, like predictive ways of working, agile ways of working, hybrid ways of working, and all those sorts of things. Okay, so you can see people domain have about, I can see 14 tasks. Okay, so people domain has about 14 tasks. Then when you go to the processes domain, it will also have tasks: executing project with the urgency it requires to deliver business value. Task 2, managing communications. Everything to do with managing communications. You as a project manager have to know this. Assessing and managing risk. We talked about this in depth, in length, both when we are talking about predictive projects and also agile projects. Agile projects, we iteratively assess and prioritize our risks. We use tools like the risk adjusted backlog. Engaging stakeholders. You see, engaging stakeholders is also part of the processes. Things like categorizing stakeholders, analyzing stakeholders, engaging them based on their category. Not all stakeholders are the same. Others will require you to pay even more attention and engage them even more. Planning and managing your budget. We talked about this when we were discussing cost management. Task 6, managing schedule. This is what we talked about it when we are looking at the processes to do with schedule management. Planning and managing quality. We talked about this, all the processes for quality management. Managing scope, all the processes of managing scope, things like determining the requirements, doing your WBS, or if you're in Agile, creating your backlog, your product backlog, things like monitoring and validating your scope, and at the end of the day, integrating all these planning activities. If you remember, at the integration level, I told you that is like, should I say, the grandfather process that integrates the efforts of all these other processes. It consolidates the other plans. All right. So in integration now, you'd be consolidating all these efforts. So that is the process domain, managing changes. We talked about changes when we are talking about the process of perform integrated change control. How do we manage changes in predictive projects? Changes in predictive projects has to follow the change management process, whereby the change control board has to decide after evaluating that change. All right. So before that change is actually approved, you cannot execute it. So once the change has been approved, now you can go to craft a plan on how you're going to complete that part of that work. Also, do we manage changes in agile projects? Changes can only go to the product backlog. Changes cannot enter into a sprint. It will disrupt the team. Planning and managing procurement. This one we talked about it during our procurement management. Managing project artifacts. Project artifacts, these are documents. I can simply call them documents or assets. So documents, you have to make sure all the information is kept up to date. We talked about things like version control. We talked about tools that we can use in managing these documents, making sure that our documents stay up to date. Determining the appropriate project methodology or the methods used. I remember we talked about this. How do you choose which method you're going to use? Are you going to use predictive? Are you going to use agile? Are you going to use hybrid? And we say there are very many factors to consider when choosing a development approach. From first of all, the type of project you're doing. If you're doing construction, high chances it will follow a predictive approach. You know, so we talked about also this. Those are tasks still under the processes. Establishing project governance structure. I remember we talked about governance. Mhm. Governance, the frameworks within which decisions are made. We talked about the pillars of the governance structure, which are the information. You need information to make decisions. You need the people to make the decisions. All right? We talked about those ones. There were like three pillars, if you remember. Setting, thresholds. At what point do we escalate something? You as a project manager, you don't have absolute powers to make all the decisions. There are some decisions which are above your pay grade. So we have to define the path for escalation. We have to define the thresholds above which we have to escalate some matters. All these are parts of governance. This is where we talked about things like the steering board, the governance board. Most of the time you'll find them appointed on your project. It's for a reason, to provide oversight and to make sure that decisions are being made, decisions that align with the project values, the project goals, and that can deliver value. Managing project issues. Remember we talked about issue? Issues are the bad things. When a risk happens, it becomes an issue. So how do we deal with issues? We have to find a resolution method, or what we call a workaround. We find a workaround on issue. An issue could be as simple as uh, your supplier was supposed to deliver assignment today, he has not delivered it now. That is an issue. You have to find a way of working around that. So in this way, you'll always collaborate with stakeholders to resolve these issues. And every issue will be assigned an issue owner to make sure that that issue is tracked, is prioritized, is resolved within the shortest time possible. All right? Ensuring knowledge transfer for project continuity. Remember, we talked about knowledge transfer in the process of closing a project. Remember where we talked about, first starting by archiving this knowledge in lessons learned, during execution, making sure that this knowledge also transfers from the experienced team members to the less experienced team members through things like pair programming, workshops, meetings, trainings, all those kind of things, or job shadowing, how you can put a less experienced personnel to watch how a senior professional is working, and they can learn by simply seeing or observing how they do work. All right, then also transferring this knowledge that has been gained within the project to the organizational level, what we call archiving project knowledge, you know to the organization, which is very important for purposes of future projects can always learn from previous projects. Planning and managing project closure or phase closure and transitions. We talked about this when we are discussing about the process of close project or phase. How do you make sure that after completing your project and you've created the final deliverable, how do you transfer it to the final end users or to operations? You have to make sure that these people, they are ready to receive this final deliverable. And we've shared examples of how sometimes we create a very good facility, but then when we hand it over 3, 4 years down the road, the facility is a mess because we handed it over to people who are not ready to actually operate these facilities. They didn't know how to use the lifts. They didn't know how to actually use the toilet system. They don't know how to maintain and take care of these things. And at the end of the day, our efforts literally went to waste. So that is why you want to make sure you want to validate if the user or the client is ready to transition these final end deliverables to operation or to be used. And you also conclude with lessons learned, writing final reports, closing procurements. Remember, are there any pending accounts that are not closed? You close them. The resources, that is the team members, you have to let them go. You not keep them forever. Make sure you throw a party for these people. And if you had set a budget to throw a party, make sure that budget is used for the party. Okay. Then, so those are how many? 17 tasks under processes. Then finally, Domain 3 is about business environment. You as a project manager, aside from knowing the different processes to complete your project, aside from knowing to build a schedule, build a budget, and all those sorts of things, manage your scope and all, you have to understand the business environment. How do you ensure compliance? Determine potential threats using things like SWOT analysis, PESTEL analysis, VUCA analysis. You have to have a holistic approach of your environment, understanding that your project sits within the organization, but also the organization sits within an external environment where there are forces that could affect. All right. So you need to make sure you understand these compliance requirements, be it regulatory, health, safety, security, financial, whatever the case may be. All right. Then you classify them, determine any potential threats to compliance, because threats to compliance are actually risks. All right. So make sure you work with your compliance department or your risk and compliance department to set strategies on how you're going to handle these things. At the end of the day, you have to remain compliant. Evaluating and delivering project benefits and value. When we were talking about an introduction to project management, we defined a project, and somewhere we talked about the project should deliver value, right? The whole point why organizations are investing millions of money in your project is because they expect some benefits. So you make sure you investigate that these benefits, first the benefits should be identified, these benefits should be documented, and we should have a plan on how we are going to realize these benefits, and there should be a system for tracking or measuring these benefits or this value in real time when we are if they are being realized. All right, so there should be a way of demonstrating that this value is being realized. That is why before we initiated our project, remember, before we created or we developed the project charter, we created a business document, remember, and the business document was made of one, the business case, and two, the benefits management plan, and it was actually an input in the process of develop project charter. So that is why it was very important. We were trying to evaluate the benefits and the business value. Evaluate and address external business environment changes for impact on scope. So just like I told you, EEFs, these are things that can affect your project, but they come from outside of the organization. You're always supposed to be scanning for these changes that are external to your business environment and recommend on strategies you're going to apply to make sure these things do not impact your project. All right, make recommendations on the strategies you can actually take. So meaning you have to continue assessing these factors that can affect your project. You have to know, how can that affect my scope, how can that affect my cost, how can that affect my schedule, literally the triple constraint, and how can that affect my quality, and how can I actually make sure I mitigate them. Supporting organizational change. When we are talking about change, we also talked about change at the organizational level. You're doing a project, maybe you want to roll a procurement managed system, a new system. You want to change the way procurement is being done within your organization. This is what we call organizational change. So you have to be supporting organizational change, but remember Kaizen. Do not just bring change simply because you want change, but bring good change. We want to focus on good change. That is the whole point. All right. And we talked about the process of rolling changes, where we talk of there's a model called the ADCAR model. First, you have to make sure people are prepared. All right. You don't just bring a change and you dump on people. Make sure people are prepared. Inform people about the impact of this change and make sure you're honest with them. If the change is going to affect maybe their job or whichever way, make sure they know. All right. And do not try to roll so much change within a very short period of time. You can face resistance, and find a way of making sure that this change sticks. Okay, now you wanted to create a project management, rather a procurement management system. They have accepted the system is in place. But now, are you getting the value that you expected out of that system? Or people are still going back to the initial ways of doing things? That is what you want to make sure you want to know. Make sure the change actually sticks. So all those are the 35 tasks that are highlighted in the examination content outline across the three domains: the people domain, the process domain, and the business environment. And your examination, when you read the examination content outline, you know exactly how the examination spreads the questions across this. The business environment, I think, will compose about 8% of your examination. Uh, the process domain will compose of 50% of your examination. Okay, so agile, predictive, hybrid, 50%. And the people domain will take about 42. So you'll have 42% on questions to do with how to handle stakeholders and people.